UnBias Key Findings. As the project has gone on, we have enjoyed a great deal of collaboration and cooperation across the work packages. We have found various linkages between our areas of work, and our results and outputs complement each other. For this reason, I'm now going on to report on our findings as a whole, relating across the project. I'll refer to 3 specific findings. Firstly, the existence of concerns over the contemporary prevalence of algorithm-driven online platforms. Secondly, a desire for change to improve the user experience of these platforms. And thirdly, opportunities for change. As I'll describe later, we see capacity to address unfairness in algorithmic systems through various means. In particular, we point to the value of education, engagement, and policy change. So, to begin with, key finding 1. We have identified genuine concerns across various users and stakeholders we spoke to in the study that the personalisation and filtering processes underpinning news feeds, search engine results, and recommendation systems can lead to unfavourable, unfair, or even discriminatory outcomes. This can result in users being vulnerable online and feeling disenfranchised and lacking agency when browsing. In the youth jury sessions conducted with young people, many participants recognised the benefits of using personalisation and filtering processes, believing them to be convenient by making their internet searches quicker and useful in showing them information that was new and interesting to them. However, many also expressed concerns that these processes can be inaccurate and often miss the nuances in their searches. They also expressed worries about the filter bubbles that exist, limiting the amount of other information that they might see when online. Some youth jurors felt that the level of personalisation that they were comfortable with depended on context. For example, music and entertainment recommendations were seen as useful. However, the personalisation of news feeds was met with concern. Some jurors expressed resignation and powerlessness that they could do little to change or influence the ways that algorithms operate. Similar concerns were raised by the stakeholders on our panel. These professionals from industry, law, research, education, and NGOs highlighted the ways in which the mechanisms through which individual users access content online can be problematic. For instance, tailored advertising can have very negative effects. They told us of the limitations of personalisation. It can be useful for advertising purposes, and of course helps to keep free access to platforms. But the assumption being made about users can be patronising and inaccurate. Furthermore, people can be fearful of invasions of privacy and the vulnerabilities being targeted. Our stakeholders told us that the lack of awareness of algorithmic processes, such as search mechanisms, can cause problems. For instance, where users are not aware of how ranking processes operate, they may have a false view of how far the top result in a search reflects reality, as opposed to being the result of a calculation that might be affected by a number of factors. Similarly, users may have an overly high feeling of trust in what they see online in general, expecting it to be authoritative and truthful. The actions of platforms in keeping these processes largely opaque and unclear was also highlighted as a problem, as was the lack of pluralism online. Our online experience is dominated by a few giant companies, and we often have little option to go elsewhere. Compare online platforms with traditional news media, that I can make a judgment about the Daily Mail or the Guardian based on its content, and choose an alternative if I don't like it. I can make the same judgment about the content I see on Google, but have less of a choice to go elsewhere. This kind of environment, according to some of our stakeholders, allows echo chambers to thrive. Our stakeholders also highlighted the particular vulnerability of children online. As digital natives, they have a social imperative to use social media, but lack protection. For instance, terms and conditions of platforms are deliberately not written in ways they can understand, and they may not yet have developed the critical thinking skills to read between the lines of what they see online, or understand why they are being shown particular adverts or being asked particular information about themselves. Moving on to finding 2, We have also identified across the project recognition that changes to the current ways in which algorithmic processes operate online are desirable and possible. Our participants have expressed the view that positive changes can be made and displayed an appetite to push for change. Once again, our youth panel participants were highly articulate in expressing this. Whilst they did at times express resignation and feelings of powerlessness, they were also clear at indicating that they wanted change and stating what it could look like. The quantitative data for the youth juries, collected via surveys, also demonstrated a desire for change. However, it shows that they also felt that the way the internet is set up and regulated now does not give them much ability to exert control over their own data. Similarly, our professional stakeholders were clear that change is desirable and described different ways it could be achieved. They pointed to changes in areas around education, regulation, and the practices of the platforms themselves. They highlighted the importance of key principles: the transparency of algorithms, the accountability of the platforms that use algorithmic systems, and the auditability of the algorithms. Our stakeholders were very keen that this was a complex matter and cannot be resolved in simple terms. We may need to make trade-offs. If we want to keep our free access to platforms, we might have to give up some of our data and privacy, or take responsibility for our own behaviour and choices. However, they did also point out that we can learn from other sectors and bring in processes that have worked elsewhere. In our project, we identified the existence of concerns about the operation of algorithm-driven online platforms and their capacity to introduce unjustified bias and produce unfair outcomes. We also identified a desire for change to address this unfairness. Our next step as a project was to identify opportunities for positive change to occur. What mechanisms might mitigate unfairness and promote a fairer user experience online? In this final section of our key findings report, I will describe opportunities for change that we have identified. I will report some of our key outputs and also want to highlight the processes we have identified as being important to identifying pathways to positive change. Any change must acknowledge and address the complexity of issues involved. It should recognise agency and sense-making that users apply when browsing online. Algorithms shape their browsing experience, but this is also filtered through their own practical reasoning and not straightforwardly influenced in a deterministic way. It can be difficult to trace exactly how we are affected by algorithmic processes and what consequences this has for individual and group behaviours. This is not a straightforward issue at all. The problem has multiple roots and causes. There are also competing perspectives. It might be that one needs to think on a case-by-case basis and make trade-offs to find workable solutions. As our participants remind us, these questions are grounded in wider societal issues. Furthermore, they remind us that whilst the aim of the UnBias project is to promote fairness online, identifying exactly what fairness is a complex task. Another piece of work in the project further highlights this complexity. It demonstrates the challenges at hand in establishing consensus on what a fair algorithm might look like, but it also offers a useful method for deliberation to identify positive steps forward. We conducted 2 rounds of a survey that presented people with a scenario about the allocation of limited resources within a particular context. We also gave them a set of 5 algorithms that could distribute the limited resources and asked them to select their preferred and least preferred one. We wanted to test out whether we could present algorithms to lay audiences in a way that they would find meaningful and be able to make an informed choice about. We were able to achieve this. Our participants engaged enthusiastically with the tasks we gave them and displayed an understanding of how the algorithms would operate in the context and the implications they might have. We also wanted to see whether our participants would select the same algorithms as most or least preferred. And of course they did not. All of our participants spoke of wanting to select an algorithm that was fair, but then drew on different understandings of what was fair when making their selections. Sometimes it was about giving everyone more or less the same, and sometimes it was about making the most people as possible happy or finding ways to measure what people deserved. It was much easier for our participants to articulate what was not fair than what was fair. The selections were also highly context dependent, with changes in selection being made when the scenario changed slightly. Some of our results suggested that participants, in their interpretations of what was fair in a context, had systematic connections to the cultural background they were in. This is something we are keen to assess further. Our quotes show how much our participants engaged and how seriously they considered the issues at hand, seeing the choice of an algorithm in many ways as a moral one with potentially serious consequences. The process represents a useful method for exploring algorithm design and use. We suggest that it could be used by developers in eliciting the requirements of a particular algorithm in a given context to ensure it meets user expectations and needs. Education and engagement are useful mechanisms to prompt and promote change. This is something we've been observing and practicing across the project. We have developed educational materials, including a video animation, to help users understand algorithmic processes and the effects of personal data collection, etc. These have often been co-created with end users, in particular young people, to draw on their understandings and perspectives and to meet their needs. We have run activities with university students, such as hackathon competitions and group projects, encouraging them to redesign fair social networks and build systems that can empower users online. We've also taken part in various public engagement activities, and you can find details of all of these things on our website. These activities form a valuable tool for those who engage with them, prompting reflections on the issues at hand. They form a starting point for people to raise awareness. We receive fairness from our participants that following the project, they have changed their browser to one that does not track them online, or that they have continued discussing with their families what should be done about the problem of fake news or stereotyped search results. The other great benefit of this engagement in the project was that it was able to elicit from our participants their ideas on what forms change could take, a ground-up approach. As a result of the conversation activities during the youth jury workshops, the jurors put forward several recommendations, including the following: that the terms and conditions of online user agreements should be made more transparent and accessible, and that this transparency should be meaningful, so that users understand the terms of online agreements, in particular in relation to data sharing. Jurors expressed that they wanted more control over algorithms, and they put forward recommendations for algorithm transparency, that this should be made clearer to the layperson. And you can see these quotes on the slide. In Work Package 4, we particularly benefited from bringing together stakeholders from multiple different sectors, meaning they brought in multiple perspectives. This multi-stakeholder approach is crucial for decisions of policy change because it is inclusive. The most effective decisions are those based on an open and deliberative process that considers a broad range of information sources and perspectives. Participants refer to the question of algorithmic governance as complex and hard to resolve, calling on the existence of multiple perspectives and stances. The attendance at the workshop by participants from a broad range of professional sectors was a fundamental benefit to our outcomes. As would be expected, individual participants frequently contributed to discussions with comments that reflected their own areas of expertise. They could then build on each other's ideas and expertise. For example, about legal frameworks, what is technically possible, what is feasible in terms of what platforms might be willing to do in the economic climate, and how specific issues fit into wider societal concerns. To illustrate this, the slides show excerpts from a group discussion about algorithmic transparency in our first workshop. They build on each other's ideas and experience to think through the issue. Facilitating these discussions also helps us to work through these ideas and put them to our own inputs. As a project, we've produced a range of different outputs, including policy recommendations and academic publications, and also the production of education and engagement materials. And you can find details of all of these on our dedicated project website. For reasons of time, I will now focus a bit more closely on two of these outputs on the following slides. One of these outputs includes a Science Technology Options Assessment report for the European Parliament. As part of our policy and stakeholder engagement work, members of the UnBias team are co-authoring with external researchers a Science Technology Options Assessment report on algorithmic accountability and transparency for the European Parliament. In this report, we provide an overview of possible legal, technical, and operational frameworks for governing algorithmic accountability and transparency. Beyond providing an up-to-date review of current and potential governance frameworks for algorithmic accountability and transparency, the report aims to provide recommendations for an algorithmic impact assessment metric for assessing the degree of regulatory scrutiny of an algorithmic system that would be appropriate or necessary for a particular context of use. The report is still being finalised, but our recommendations will include awareness raising, which includes education, watchdogs, and whistleblowers, accountability in public sector use of algorithmic decision making, and if we turn over to the next slide, regulatory oversight and legal liability, and it makes recommendations in relation to the global dimension of algorithmic governance. The second output that we'll look a little more closely at is the UnBias Fairness Toolkit. This has been developed through our own work with Giles Lane at the Creative Studio Proboscis. It was developed through a series of co-creation workshops we ran with schools and is aimed to foster reflection and dialogue amongst and between online users, developers, industry, and policy. The toolkit provides for a pragmatic and practical way to raise awareness and stimulate dialogue about bias, trust, and fairness in algorithms and digital technologies. It is designed to make complex and often abstract ideas tangible and accessible to young people and to non-experts across society. It supports critical thinking skills that can help people feel empowered to make better informed choices and decisions about how they interact with algorithmic systems. It helps collect evidence of how people feel about the issues and what motivates them to share their concerns by contributing to a public civic dialogue. It provides a communication channel for stakeholders in industry, policy, regulation, and civil society to respond to public concerns about these issues. It can also be used by developers of algorithms and digital systems to reflect on ethical issues and as a practical method for implementing responsible research and innovation. And you can find the toolkit on our website, on which you can download it for free. The toolkit has 5 main elements. There's a handbook, which is a booklet outlining the tools and providing suggestions for use. There are awareness cards, which are a deck of cards for starting conversations and raising awareness about the issues of bias, fairness, and trust in algorithms. There's a trustscape, which is a worksheet for capturing how people feel about the issues and what they would like to see done. And these can be submitted and shared anonymously on our UnBias website. And there's a meta map, which is a worksheet for stakeholders to respond to concerns raised in trustscapes. And finally, there's a value perception worksheet, which is for participants and stakeholders to reflect on the process and toolkit, exploring motivations, opportunities, costs, and value gained. And you can learn more about these on our website, so do have a look. Okay, and here are details of our project website. On this, you can delve into more detail about everything that's been discussed during this presentation, so please do visit if you get the chance. This slide shows details of our website address, on which you can find many details about the project process and the outcomes of the project itself, and our experiences during the project reflected through our blog. So please do visit if you'd like to learn more about the work we've undertaken or about the institutions involved and their particular roles.